Um, so thanks for joining us all. And we've got Abigail and Kayla from Kitchen Sink. Abigail, who you know very well from a previous life at Rogue Valley Food System Network. And gosh, this one came from, I think Abigail and I had a conversation at the convening. And as it turns out, Abigail learned an awful lot about selling farm to institution product in the state of Oregon when she moved from Rogue Valley Food System Network and became a broker for Kitchen Sink. There was a learning curve that you went through, and I asked Abigail if she would join us for a call and talk about what that learning curve looked like, and she said yes. And I think we should bring Kayla too. Kayla's been deeply involved in some of the assessments and all of the work that Kitchen Sink has done here in Oregon. So from there, Abigail and Kayla, why don't you go ahead and take it away? And Kayla, you in particular probably should introduce yourself to this group and what your role is, because I know you've worked with many of them, but perhaps not all of them.
Perfect. Sounds good. And I'll let Abigail start and I'll introduce myself. That we have a little slide of intro. So yeah.
Yeah, and thanks for the good intro and context, Sydney. I feel like there's this like sentiment of like, okay, I don't know if this is like if everyone in the Food Hub Club or all producers should pursue institutional sales. And we kind of like talk about like what makes sense for some types of businesses and what doesn't, and just to like prevent people from a lot of pain and maybe some struggles, but also like we're all doing this and like what are ways to do it better too. Because I know like people want to connect with schools and have those connections and other institutions too. And there's a way that it makes sense and there's a way where it doesn't. So yeah, we kind of just want to break down how we assessed certain or the hubs that we're working with for the initial pilot that the Oregon Farm Institution Collaborative funded us to do, and then look at like why schools and institutions are a bit challenging to work with, and how we approach that work with institutions. And really like taking in like sales theory and all that good stuff. So definitely like welcome questions, and it's great to have like a bunch of food hubs to like talk about this information with because it's like, yeah, so relevant for you all. So, um, yeah, and if I don't know you, I'm Abigail Blinn, working with Kitchen Sink for about a year now, a little over a year now. I'm the regional sales lead for the Pacific Northwest, mostly in Oregon, but doing some stuff in Southern Washington. And yeah, reach out to schools, hospitals, colleges, corporate dining facilities. We have like over 200 that we reach out to each week and learn a lot from them. So just want to kind of break down what that looks like. And I'll let Kayla introduce herself.
I'm Kayla Caters, how you say that oddly spelled last name. I'm actually based in Iowa, but I've been working with Abigail and with hubs that we're supporting for sales in Oregon for Abigail's been on for a little over a year, and I think we started some of the work of doing deep dives on sales systems and like operational systems for the hubs in the summer of the year before that. So I feel like we've feels like I have one foot in Oregon all the time, kind of. My background is in food hub development and local food systems from a variety of angles. I grew up on a farm where we did grass-fed beef, and that kind of launched me into really caring deeply about the food system, and I never quit. So I've run a food hub, I've managed some food hub networks, and then have also done some work in nonprofits developing food system related programs, including like Iowa's local food purchase assistance program with some partners. So yeah, it's been fun to see how Oregon is working and like what learnings we can bring from some other regions to Oregon and vice versa.
Yeah, and so Kitchen Sink does this like direct brokerage work from what I'm doing, and there's two other people on our team that do this in Colorado, Montana, and Iowa. But we also do consulting to get states into the right kind of or like think about this work in order to prepare them for potential food sales with food hubs and institutions. So kind of like doing both of those things simultaneously. Um, and doing that work across the nation. And Kayla can speak to where they do that work too, specifically if you have questions about that. And yeah, for Oregon, we're supporting 3 food hubs. One, the Gorge Farmer Collective in the Gorge, serving Multnomah County and Portland metro area. Agriculture Connections supports mostly just Deschutes, but some institutions in Crook and Jefferson counties. And then Lane County Bounty serves Lane County, but we're also starting a Salem route in March. So we'll be headed up north Willamette Valley. And these hubs are definitely concentrated in that like northwest part of the state, but we're doing a lot of work to support some hubs south of us with a produce route that goes to Southern Oregon. Ag Connects has some connections with Harney County. I see Kelly on the call. And then we're also exploring ways to meet the North Coast through Gorge Farmer Collective with a route this month, and also trying to find ways to go out further east and supporting schools to be able to put together orders that make sense for the hubs to be able to deliver there. So even though we are concentrated in the Northwest, we know the need is statewide and try our best to meet those areas that don't drive our food hubs broke. Yeah, so I kind of want to get a sense of who is in the room. Raise your virtual hand if you are a food hub or operate a food hub or work for a food hub. Still, I can't see this in presenter mode, but
You're
um,
getting some really fun animations of the thumbs flying up the screen.
love it, love it. I see Jasmine on there. Okay. The next one. Raise your hand if you're a support actor, value chain coordinator, help support the movement of food. Maybe you're not a physical aggregator distributor, but are making it happen. Carrie, I know you're a food hub. And also raise a hand if you've sold to institutions. Okay, we got Carrie in there, holding down Southern Oregon Head Start. And Aaron, yep. Okay, couple. And then, yeah, raise your hand if you've considered selling to institutions or wanting to do that. Yeah, we got Bobby, Umpqua folks. Yeah, so maybe people are doing it but want to do it better, or yeah, still considering systems around it. Sweet. All right, well, I'll pass it to Kayla to kind of go through what that like assessment process looked like initially.
Okay, trying to figure out how to unmute myself in presenter mode. And Abigail or Sydney, if people say things in the chat, feel free to like tell me what they are because I am not very good at seeing both the chat and the presentation slides. But yeah, so we kind of wanted to start out a little bit by thinking about how we approach when we're going to come in and do sales for a hub, like what we think a food aggregator uh, can have or should have as some of the foundational systems to make them ready for this, because well, our first priority is to do no harm. We don't want to put a food hub in a situation where we're like bringing them sales that they can't handle, whether that's operationally or financially or for other reasons. And so we really want to think about how hubs are positioned, and we want to share kind of our thoughts on that with you all because it's probably also kind of a helpful self-assessment as you think about how much institutional sales you want to incorporate into your hub and what the scale of those should be and what feels like the right fit for you. So well, thinking about those assessments, there's kind of a couple of key institutional market challenges that we're designing around and thinking about the hub systems to handle these kind of 3 challenges. There are others, but some of the others are just like basic wholesale challenges, and we'll talk through all of them. But the 3 we really wanted to call out are the lower margins that institutional customers demand. They're super price sensitive. This is similar to wholesale, but it's like the higher volume end of wholesale. Institutional customers have really slow cash flow, and so they might not be paying you for at least 30 days and maybe up to as many as 60 days. Like some schools, for example, have really slow bookkeeping processes, check cutting processes, and so you might deliver something and not get paid for a really long time. And then the timing and systems for these customers also, it requires advanced planning. And I think with a caveat that we'll probably come back to throughout this presentation, it's not that you can't do a last minute sale to an institution or a food hub and like show them an availability list for this week for something they want to buy next week. Sorry, I said institution or school, not for a food hub. But if you want to try to really focus on building them as a large part of sales, a key market channel for you, and really get a volume sale from these institutional customers, the further ahead you can plan in advance really helps, given the sort of mismatch between the amount of supply that most food hubs have and the need to like build that volume with plenty of notice to match one of those sales. So with those three challenges, we kind of think about what hubs have, and these are some of the dynamics that we think about as we're assessing them. So first is the physical infrastructure that a food hub has. What's their sourcing capability? What's their staff capacity like? Do they have known wholesale availability? What kind of ordering systems are they operating? And then also, how's their cash flow look? And I'll get into each of these individually. And then we also, as long as we're like talking about everything that a food hub is doing already, if we see things that are helpful for just a general business health checkup, we kind of share that out in the assessments. And with a caveat that like we're not business planner developers, that's not really our role in this at all. But with some of our background knowledge, when we see things that are sort of like red or yellow flags, we want to make sure that food hub operators are aware of those. And so we often recommend that folks do work with some, consultants whose whole focus is business planning for food businesses and food hubs, and we'll talk more about that later on in the presentation too. And when you look at these things, I don't want to sort of portray this as like, this is hard and fast. We kind of think like, okay, this hub has a strength here, or this could be a challenge, or this is a real weakness, and it's something to watch and make sure that that we can kind of like plan around it if they're developing these type of sales. Okay, so the first dynamic is infrastructure. And in this one, we're really thinking about, do you have the infrastructure to deal with wholesale sales? And ideally, that means handling pallets, because the goal is to get you to a point where you are doing a large volume order for a school, not just a couple cases here and there. So that means having cooler space that can accommodate, quite a few cases or pallets with hopefully pallet doors. A warehouse space for some of those like shelf stable items or things like root crops that can also accommodate that. A refrigerated truck or a van that can, again, handle pallets. I'm going to go skip to the last one. Ideally, it'd be nice if there was a freezer. That's not kind of a must-have, but there are a lot of products that we often find in different territories that are nice to sell in volume that are frozen, and so that helps expand what you could sell. And then established routes with emphasis on established. Thinking really about like if you are already going on routes and you know that your truck is basically breaking even on them, then when we add sales to those routes, it's something you can handle. We're not sort of bringing you like one sale at a time and hoping that you will maybe go here today or go there tomorrow. And that also means when we communicate with customers, we know where you're going and when, and we can tell them some like firm, real, accurate information about when they might be able to get your product. Okay, next is sourcing capability. And we're really thinking about wholesale volumes here. Not that there aren't items that we can sell that are, for smaller farms that are maybe just dabbling in wholesale a little bit, but we really want to see that a hub has access to some wholesale farms or is in an area with plenty of supply to be able to actually serve these volume sales. The diversity across product categories is also important, not just thinking about, do you have all kinds of produce, but can you also serve grains and dairy and potentially meat or other proteins or value-added products. Having a range really makes it a lot easier to build an order for an institutional customer to a volume that like pays off. And then we also think about whether your sourcing is distributed across farms. If you're sort of only relying on one or two suppliers and your sourcing is really concentrated, that kind of puts you at risk. And it's a harder value proposition to an institutional customer because they might start saying, why don't I just get that right from the farm? Okay, we also are thinking about your staff capacity. So this is both bandwidth and experience. And if you're already really, really busy with the current sales you're doing or kind of at a growth edge, we don't want to be throwing new sales that would like overtax just your human capacity to handle them. And we also find that if the staff has more experience with wholesale sales, maybe institutions not required. Again, this is all like strength to weakness sort of gray areas, but kind of being ready to know how to manage some of the differences that happen when you're doing wholesale sales, both in your operations and your sales and financials. If staff is sort of ready for that or has at least the bandwidth and time to grow as those systems are needed and be able to implement them. Okay, wholesale availability. And it's easy to sort of put this visual on the screen that is an example of a wholesale availability list. And it sort of feels like anyone could make this spreadsheet, right? But the real magic and secret sauce behind the spreadsheet is the data and the quality of it that's in it. So we want to know that the aggregator or food hub that we're working with has the systems to really accurately collect and communicate that wholesale availability. And not just whether these things are out there in the marketplace and they exist, but that they actually have priced these things out. They know what works for their hub as far as pricing and the margins they have to add, which we'll talk about later. But they also have sort of put this out in the marketplace and seen that it has been tested by the markets and that people will buy it. And again, this isn't required, and this is a thing that we help walk people through often. But how about your future availability? You might be able to come up with a list for like what you know is available right now. But if we're talking to a customer for a sale that might happen in 2 months, can you get an idea about what that future product mix might look like? And can you give them an estimated price? Ordering systems is another piece of this. And the example on the screen here is AgConnect's LFM, Local Food Marketplace, which it's not required that you have a software, but basically what we want to see is that a hub has really strong systems to be able to take customer orders and not lose them, and then be able to communicate them well and source them from farmers and sort of recombine orders from a whole bunch of customers and boil that down for a farmer into like 20 cases of this and 2 go to each of these customers. And another piece that a lot of folks work on that they maybe haven't done before until they've done institutional sales is thinking about how to record those for future order periods instead of just the sort of current order cycle or the current availability list week to week thing that they're sending out. I do want to note here, because I'm excited about it, that if you have Local Food Marketplace, they are developing some pre-order capabilities. And so if we get into this in the Q&A or have time to talk later, we'll talk a little bit about like what we mean by future order periods and a little bit about the advanced planning. Okay, and this is really important, and this goes back to do no harm. I mean, I think all the things we talk about could do you harm if you don't have the staff capacity and suddenly you have way more sales and you're stressed and your staff leaves, that could do you harm. But if you don't have a cash cushion and you start doing these sales without any planning, you could run out of money, and that would do your do your organization a lot of harm. So we really want people to think about their cash flow management. And basically, on this slide, you'll see down at the bottom this diagram here. For most hubs that are starting out with direct-to-consumer type sales, or even small wholesale that's paying a little bit faster, in the direct-to-consumer model, people are paying you upfront. And if we follow the green line, that's the dollars through the hub. So they've paid the hub has the money. Somewhere in here, the hub is delivering before they actually have to pay the farmer. So you have the money in hand upfront, and you're not like waiting around to get it before you pay the farmer. In the institutional sales model, you are going to get you're going to first have to pay the farmer, and they'll probably want to be paid within 2 weeks is often a common payment term. Some people are out to a month with farmers, but of when they deliver it to you. Meanwhile, when you deliver it to your institutional customer, they could be out 45 days or even longer at 60 days. So we suddenly have this gap between your payment term to a farmer and when you're going to get paid by your customer. That might be 2 weeks, it might be a month, it might be 45 days. And you have to have the cash to pay your farmer first and be waiting around for that buyer to pay you back. So just a little like mental exercise here. If you imagine that you did a $10,000 sale to the school, you've paid the farmer within 15 days, but you're not getting paid for 30 days, you need to have at least $10,000 sitting in the bank as a cash flow to use to buffer that money so that you can pay your staff that did the sale, you can pay your farmers what it cost, what your cost of goods were. And if you multiply that, you start to multiply that over multiple sales in a month, that number of like having a cash reserve or a line of credit required just goes up and up. So if you're working without that, you are putting yourself in a lot of risk if you're trying to do many large volume sales at long payment terms. So we want to see that folks are prepared for longer customer terms. They have fair payment terms to the farmers. Processes, Aaron, I'm going to read this last thing and then I'll answer your question. We want to see processes for accounts receivable because if you're used to people paying online and upfront, you might not be used to like sending out invoices later and going and like knocking on people's doors and calling them up if they haven't called them. And then we want to see like some type of cash cushion or line of credit. Okay, Aaron, what's your thought contribution question?
I know this happens and like we're not taking payment directly from schools right now, but we are the go-between. So we pick up the products, deliver them to schools, and then schools pay the farm. But I mean, we could just drop the product off at the school and get a check from them right then and there, like with our process that we're currently doing. I'm curious how people have this set up and why you're waiting instead of going to like getting payment at the time you drop the product off.
Some schools will do a direct payment, but it's rare in my experience that they're able to do that. They have to get it approved through their business, like just like the logistics of them getting that payment submitted and a check sent.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, does everyone give schools 30 days? I'm just thinking through, like, I mean, I know it happens with our farmers because they contact me and they're like, hey, the school hasn't paid this yet, and I have to nudge the school. But as soon as I nudge them, they pay it. So to me, I'm like, I would give them like 5 days to pay it, or you have to pay in advance for these products that I'm about to deliver you.
I mean, I think that like in an ideal world, the supplier would be able to dictate those terms, right? And if we could, we would set them up in a way that like didn't make the supplier basically a bank for a month at a time. But the problem is that like while there are examples of customers who will go out of their way and change their processes and do that, when you're trying to do this on a scale of like, let's aim for every institutional customer in this region, the the large majority of them are not going to do that. And so it's sort of like, do you meet institutions where they're at to get them to buy the products? And if so, how do you plan around that? Or do you try to get them to change their processes? Some of them will, but fewer of them will. So I guess, we're sort of like, if we're going for the least common denominator to be able to talk to everyone, this is the type of thing that people have to be prepared for in managing their business. I don't know, Abigail, you look like you maybe had something to add to that.
Yeah, I will say like yeah, because some like if there isn't that like net 30 payment, like they'll just be like, cool, I'll go on to someone else. And that's what we're trying to prevent is like if we can build out systems to accommodate for this, and like we want to do that because that is a system that's across the board. But yeah, I will note someone mentioned like personal cards or using a credit card and yeah, food service management companies or even like the corporate dining accounts that we work with like usually have a personal card that they can do payments with. But that still takes them like within like 15 days to pay that sometimes. Or we'll have that on record. But yeah, it's mostly like building systems around this that is very common.
Mhm.
The
And again,
larger the, oh, sorry, Kayla. The
I'll go.
larger the sale, Aaron, the more likely it is that they'll force you onto whatever their payment platform is,
Mhm.
because typically they'll have either limits that they can spend on that card, and how it lands in their P&L affects like their review process with their manager and their contract food service provider. So if you're doing a smaller sale, it's more likely that you would then be able to negotiate a tighter net. But on a larger sale, you're probably going to get shut out.
And so this kind of goes back to kind of to strategy again. Like if institutions are kind of like a piece of your sales that you're like, we'll do a little bit of that and it'll be small volume, then you might be able to get those terms or put it on a card. If we're trying to like figure out how to capture the large volume and get them to do bigger sales, then we have to have the systems that accommodate them so we can push them over the threshold there. Okay, and then just kind of an overview of some of the business health checkup things I like to think about when we're talking with folks, like what are your existing risks as a business? And I say business, I know that there are folks that are nonprofits that are food hubs. I've worked with a lot of nonprofit food hubs. I just want to emphasize that like you still have to be thinking about these things regardless of your organizational structure as you figure out what you're charging for the food, what you're paying farmers for it. So thinking about how diversified your income from your food sales are, how diversified your supply is from your farmers. Again, going to that cash flow and cash position, looking at kind of like your revenue and where you need to be for your total revenue to break even or where you would profit, and thinking about margins. And I do want to spend some time talking a little bit about margins because they're so core to kind of how we're thinking about these processes and making sure that food hubs aren't putting themselves at risk by taking lower margin sales. So I'm going to talk a little bit about margin benchmarks, and then I want to make sure that we all are clear about the difference between markup and margin. So that's kind of where we're going here. So for some margin benchmarks for direct-to-consumer sales, by which we're thinking about channels that are like home consumers, aggregated CSA boxes, online markets, those lower volume or retail format buyers, they obviously can be charged more for those smaller quantities of food. And the benchmark margins for aggregators there are like 35% and above is what we kind of commonly think of. For folks doing wholesale, and I'm kind of dividing this mentally into some smaller wholesale, like restaurants or small groceries, and larger wholesales, like the institution was we're talking about, distributors, large grocery chains. They obviously have much higher volume purchases in wholesale formats and lower pricing. And the kind of benchmark margins that we're thinking of there with hubs are like 20 to maybe 25%. Yay, institutions. Thinking about these benchmarks, like what they imply, that 35% margin for direct-to-consumer hubs or channels, this means that the break-even can be at a smaller scale than a wholesale hub. Now, granted, your 35% margin might have to get much higher than that if you're doing a lot of home delivery and have higher costs. So just want to say that's why there's like plus, plus, plus. For a wholesale food hub, like if your margins are below 20%, from some of the modeling that we'll look at, that can be kind of challenging. It can be really hard to break even with low margins. And so break even at that percent requires a lot of volume. Okay, so I just have talked about margins for 2 slides. I want to just do a quick like markup versus margins knowledge check because people use these terms interchangeably sometimes. So Abigail, maybe I'll ask you to monitor the chat, or people can come off mute and just say your answer. But if you bought something for 75 cents, you bought a 75-cent lollipop, and you were going to sell it to me for $1, can you tell me how much you marked it up and what the markup percentage is?
Yeah, we're making you guys do math.
I know. Everybody loves math. I've heard.
You heard wrong. Just kidding. Food hubs love math.
Do we have any chat answers?
I think everyone thinks it's a trick question.
Oh, it's not really a trick question.
Can I, as the person who doesn't sell anything except, I don't know, the extension service, is the markup 25 cents?
yes, the markup is 25 cents, but the percentage of it is out of what you bought it for. So it's a 33% markup.
Right.
The margin is also 25 cents, but
What
it's
is
out of
it?
what you
Yeah.
sold it for. Yep.
See, that's it, Christy. It was the, yeah.
Yes.
Got it.
So you've just heard me talk about margins. You're going to hear me talk more about margins. And I just want to make sure that we're clear between those two things because they're not equal. And the margin is always going to be lower than the markup. So if I give you a benchmark that's like a 20% margin and you think of that as a markup and you start marking up your sales that way, you're actually going to be achieving a much lower margin than that. And I don't want to be leading you astray. So this is just sort of the rundown of those markups based on the cost for the product. In other words, what was the farmer's price? That's the denominator. What did you buy it for? So you look at your price minus your cost over the cost. In contrast, the hub is divided by what you're selling it for, and it sounds like, oh yeah, we're aiming for like 67% cost of goods. In other words, that's what you're giving to the farmer, or a 33% margin. Okay, why do those margin benchmarks really matter? Because it's like we can talk about the lollipop that's 75 cents and you resell it for $1, but if you sell 100,000 of those lollipops, I'm not going to do that math in my head right now, that's you get to your gross revenue for your entire business and the cost of your lollipops for your entire business. And so that percentage that you put on the one lollipop starts to build up into your entire gross profit margin for your entire food hub or aggregating operation. And so that tells you how much you have to sell to break even. It tells you when you're going to be profitable. And these margins impact you regardless of whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit structure. So if we think of the gross profit margin as the amount of revenue left to fund your operations after you pay farmers, we can see that it's pretty important. So we did this thought experiment where we sold $600,000 worth of food, and we're selling that all in a direct-to-consumer channel. We can assume that benchmark margin of 35%. Remember, this is a 54% markup. And so if we apply that 54% markup or 35% margin across every sale we do, our gross profit margin then is also 35%. And we can multiply $600,000 of our total revenue times that margin, and we get $210,000. That's what's left over for us to operate on as a food hub. If we do the same mental exercise, but we've sold all those $600,000 worth of food at a wholesale margin of 20%, which is a 25% markup, and we apply that across all sales, our gross profit margin at 20%, that means multiply that times 600,000, our gross profit is $120,000. When you compare these two things, $210,000 versus $120,000 as like your entire operating budget for your organization, is it possible to break even? Yeah, I think possibly yes, depending on what you're up to, what your infrastructure looks like in a 35% margin situation. Is it possible with $120,000 for wholesale? I think probably not. And so thinking about how you're applying these margins really helps you reverse engineer like what your budget is for your organization, and then say like, okay, this is the channel we're approaching. This is how we're going to build our sales to meet what we need to operate on. I really want to shout out Food Finance Institute here because they have incredible materials for like financial consultants for food businesses and for food hubs. They have a food hub boot camp on financials. Like check them out for sure. But I'm just going to share a little like model that they did. This is dated. This is like from 2017. I think Tara Johnson put this together to model out if your food hub was only wholesale. And these numbers can be a little scary, but don't be scared, but we'll just start here. So in this wholesale model she put together, this food hub has $2 million in annual sales. They have cost of goods. In other words, they paid farmers at 80%. So their gross profit margin is 20%, but they paid farmers 80%. That's $1,600,000. Then down lower in their P&L, this is the take-home money they had to operate on, $400,000, 20% benchmark margin. And we'll see here, their total expenses were $465,000. If we have $400,000 in gross profit, $465,000 in operating expenses, they would be at negative $65,000, even though they'd sold $2 million in food. It's a net 3% loss. And that can be kind of scary. This is all just to say, like, to do only this channel, it takes a large volume to break even. In their model, I think the hub broke even at $3 million in sales. That's not to say this is the case for every single hub anywhere that's doing this type of work. They might have very different expenses, etc. But it just illustrates like the volume here. And so it also doesn't mean you have to go broke if you're doing this. It just means you need to fill the gap. And that means either a plan to grow the sales to the break-even point, $3 million in this modeled case, or to fundraise. And there's a couple strategies here. You can be a hybrid food hub. You can have both direct-to-consumer and wholesale channels. You can fill that gap with grants that either help you get to a runway where you can break even on sales alone or be constant. And when you think about losing $65,000 in a charitable sort of mindset, like if you did raise $65,000, every dollar that you would generate would actually create $30 in local food sales at $2 million in sales. So that's a pretty big impact. Or if you go by the cost of goods to farmers, it's $1 that you would raise would create $24 worth of sales for farmers. So there are ways to sort of put this business model in a nonprofit frame and think about it differently too. But ultimately, all that is to say, like, we really want hubs to be thinking about these strategies around what sales channels they're using with a business model, a pro forma in mind that helps support the context and goals of your organizational structure. And I know we mentioned Food Finance Institute. I also just put a snap of Good Roots here. They're two kind of organizations that do a lot of one-on-one technical assistance and consulting with food businesses and food hubs to help them think about organizing, their models exactly around this and specialized in food. So there's some inherent tensions with what you choose between maximizing farmer viability and returning as much revenue to them as possible. If that's your goal, there's like feeding vulnerable populations that are probably more price sensitive, and that's exactly the institutional customers we're talking about that are feeding, our school children and folks in prison populations and folks in hospital settings, but they're super price sensitive customers, and that's going to sort of tug in these opposite directions on how you design your hub. And maximizing food hub viability, because some hubs are designed to try to create profit. Some hubs are just designed to bring the maximum return to farmers. But if you aren't at least breaking even in some way, whether that's with grants or without, you're not going to be around long enough to serve your other goals, whether they're farmer viability or feeding vulnerable populations or both. So just thinking about this, like, I think some of the hubs that we have talked to, they're in a context where they actually have kind of limited supply, where they're working with farmers that maybe aren't wholesale farmers or newer farmers that themselves have been more direct to consumer oriented. They have untapped retail demand, like they could keep growing an aggregated CSA for days and still be doing things at like a 40% margin, et cetera. And their main priority, if it's really to support the farmers versus to access institutions for a particular core goal of their organization. So if that's kind of your priority, it might be more strategic really to kind of develop those direct-to-consumer channels and grow them that match your farmer scale. And then as your farmers scale beyond that capacity, you could start to consider these like lower margin but higher volume market channels. Okay, we talked about low margins, we've talked about slow cash flow. We haven't talked about timing and systems, so I'm going to talk about that really briefly, and then Abigail, I want you to talk so we don't have to spend too much time here.
Yeah, do you want to like pause for questions?
Oh yeah, let's pause for questions.
I know you guys are kind of asking them while they come up, but just to like digest.
Yeah.
Business stuff.
You want to say any of them out loud, Abigail? Since I'm not, maybe I can look at the chat and screen share and not be weird.
Well, Carrie asked about like different margins for wholesale versus institution. The hubs we work with in Oregon don't differentiate that, but I'm curious if you've seen that, Kayla.
Some people will do like I feel like people can get really specific on tiers if they want to, and that's where like that kind of 20 to 25% range comes into play for me. Whether you set that as like a customer class and sort of say all schools are going to be 20%, but like my small restaurants are going to be 25%, or you don't have to apply this margin across the board on every single product. You might say like have a really high value product of cheese, and you're like, if I ship one case of this cheese, it's like worth a lot of money, even at a pretty low margin. So I'm going to apply a 16% margin to that and a 28% margin to onions. And this will all build up into the kind of gross margin that I'm aiming for. Other chat questions?
That was the last chat question, but curious if anyone question, comments, concerns. Definitely like some dense info, but great info. I'm glad it's recorded.
I think I want to point out in this conversation about margin, Kayla, you just talked about how you might look at your line items individually and target an aggregated or a blended margin. I think that's a really important point. Sometimes when we hear, this needs to be your margin, we don't think, oh, we can tinker with how we achieve that margin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And sometimes like folks that are using software, the software will just apply a margin you choose, can kind of, like it's good to not lose sight of that and to go in and be like more actively thinking about like, would somebody really pay that for this? Like, is this an appropriate margin to put on a pound of ground beef or whatever it is?
And then
Cool.
another question is like how to achieve a needed margin when serving a low-income population that can't afford it. I think that comes in where like, yeah, getting supplemented funds for what you're doing and making that, yeah, that value proposition of what you're doing for farmers and for the intended vulnerable populations is the key thing.
Yeah. And that really like cuts right to the heart of the issue, because if our twin goals are to give as much money back to the farmer in a system that has not given farmers profit or prosperity or even viability, but at the same time try to do that in the hardest market. I mean, it's really sort of means that as a business, the Food Hub has like almost no margin for error. And so I think the level of difficulty, gets higher as you try to like access these customers. But, incentives in Oregon for schools and like the populations and communities that are really like asking for this from their institutions, I think have created both like social and actual financial incentives for them to be willing to pay a little bit more for some of this stuff. And so as you'll hear Abigail talk about, like there's a combination of things at play to make it work. We just don't want to make it sound like easy in these sales, like, you fall off a log and, you just have one and it's great and it'll pay you back and it'll make your whole business operate super easily. Okay. Should I move on a little bit, Abigail, to some of this timing and then we'll get into sales and save time for Q&A?
Yeah, totally. And I don't know, like the hubs that we're working with right now, like aren't at this level, and that's why they have blended models. They have supplementation of grant funds and things like that. And in order for them to reach revenue that makes sense for their whole business to be operating just on sales, food sales, it's definitely like an elaborate system. But here's like, yeah, we just want to kind of give the breakdown of why like institutional sales could be like an avenue for your business, but like it adds a layer of complication too.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so just compare and contrasting a little bit like the timing that we're used to with these different customers. I don't know why small wholesale isn't showing up on here, but the TLDR of this slide is like a lot of local foods markets and suppliers are sort of set up to serve direct to consumer and small wholesalers. Thinking of small wholesales again as like restaurants, small grocers. This really like pushes us into systems that accommodate these people's desires and whims. So if you're anything like me as a consumer, I'm like, my fridge is empty. I have to go shop right now. I do order ahead from my local food hub, but I often forget. And so like usually this consumer behavior is like I go to the store, I see it, I want it, I buy it, my fridge is out, I get it. I don't want to have to wait. And I'm also not planning that far ahead about it. Small wholesale, they are thinking about not wanting things to go bad, and they don't know how many customers are going to walk into their small grocery store or walk into their restaurant in any given day. And so they kind of want to be able to order last minute as well to sort of say like, oh, we're like almost out of greens on the shelf. This is how many I need, instead of ordering too many and having some of them go bad. So both of these behaviors kind of have a like preference towards being able to order as close to the delivery date as possible. I'm not sure if I can run my controls. Oh, my screen sharing's paused. Let me try again. That's why. Okay. No?
Huh.
Weird. Oh, that's doing it. Okay. So that means that like supplier systems are often really short order cycles, like place your order on Monday, get it on Wednesday. And so they're not always having the capacity to take an order further in advance. They're really focused on the current availability, like this is what we have today, it can be accessed right now, not what could be made available if we planned. All that results in kind of like a higher prices, lower quantity type of situation, and it's really supply driven. Like this is the supply, take it or leave it in the time frame that we've laid out for you, which is soon. So if I was going to build a roadmap of those ordering systems, it sort of looks like supplier confirmation comes first. This is what we have. Then the customer's order based on exact known quantities of what's available, and the delivery happens. And the payment could be right when the customer's order for retail or a little bit later for those small wholesales. Institutions are not shopping that way because they have some really different parameters. They're publishing their menus. They know how many people are going to eat pretty well ahead of time, so they know their demand. They have high volume capacity, and so they can know and project what they need in advance. So instead of benefiting from ordering it last minute, they benefit from like locking it in and being assured that they're going to get what they want in advance. Yeah, I won't go into how their current suppliers work because they can call them last minute and absorb huge sales, but for local food sales, we really need to know that in advance to get the product volume assembled for them. So that means they need to order earlier. They've already like put it on the menu, and if they're not getting it from a local supplier, they need to call their mainline distributor and get it elsewhere so they don't like mess up their menu. And they don't really want to put in a menu or in an order for a menu like 2 days from like right now to get it in 2 days because they already need to be sure that it's coming. So they need a like much longer order period and a confirmation. And to do that, you need to know what's going to happen, be available for them in a few weeks. And as we talked about, they're super price sensitive. So they want to be able to access high volumes, but with lower prices. And so this is more of a demand driven kind of model for thinking about the sales. And that flips the script really on how we think about the sales process and a lot of what Abigail is doing with folks. So can they first plan and express interest with a hub or with a farmer? And at this meeting come with like, here's the estimated things we think will be available in a few months and the estimated prices. And then the school can finalize, or the other institution can finalize the order and say, I definitely want that, provided that the prices that you sort of showed me are still accurate. And then the supplier can call, all the individual farmers and make sure that they've got that together, and then tell the customer like, yep, that's definitely coming, and then the delivery can happen. So it kind of flips where the supplier confirms what they have with where the buyer places an order that they say they really want and that they're going to stick to if the supplier can make it happen. I think we won't spend any time on this slide, Abigail, and we can pass it over to you. Do you want to run? Do you want to drive? Like, you want me to stop sharing so you can share, or do you want me to you can just like give me a sign and I'll switch slides?
Well, that's a good idea. Yeah, I'll share my slides so it's a little bit easier to go through this stuff. Yeah, so often like we're talking to food hubs that already have like a bit of processes under their belt. And when we go into pursuing larger sales and kind of go to Carrie's question about like looking at like sales theory and applying that to institutions for people that we know have different ordering cycles and different systems. One, like, is aligning what we're doing with what they're doing, and also just like following a direct and passive outreach model that like can continue to repeat and build and help with those relationships. Um, so much of my day in, day out is reaching out to people, pinging them about things that they need or what they want, or trying to have a conversation with someone, just introducing myself to them. And it's all within like a really like well-established sales theory. So if looking at a lot of what we're doing and a lot of what I used to do in like the nonprofit sphere of reaching out and being like a resource person for someone, it doesn't like didn't necessarily follow like sales rules or structure, but it's been like so helpful to think about people and their framing around like whether or not they'll go and do something as predictable and really like common human behavior. So it kind of is like this. I mean, the funnel sales process looks at like a couple different ways, but this is one that I liked because we're talking about once like reaching out to people that might be qualified for your food hub or like of interest to pursue and getting them aware of you, and then identifying like introducing your products or like qualifying them as like as interested, and then yeah, make getting them like a hook or like making them make sure they know that you have something that you need. And then there's that desire that leads to action of purchasing something and maintaining that relationship and going and maintaining that. Yeah. So we're kind of putting people through or customers through this funnel. And that's why it's kind of like this process of um, doing one at a time and not thinking that like one phone call is going to lead to a sale or one email blast is going to lead to a sale, but taking people through a process of what they need to understand in order to feel prepared to like make a purchase or a decision around what you have. So kind of going through this step by step. First thing I did with these hubs was create a lead list of all the institutions in their area. And when we like have them on this list, I'm researching them and seeing what they have as far as menus and seeing if they're a good fit for the food hub and where their location is, if it meets like within distribution routes and things like that. So really prospecting, getting a sense of who's out there. And a lot of that has to do with knowing your customers. I like luckily have a background in dietetics and food service and have like yeah known the school food system really well, and as well as hospital food systems and colleges and things like that. So being able to take that information to this of knowing your customers is really helpful. um, there's also other ways to like know about your customers, and that's reaching out to them and asking them what they do around local food and if they have any interest in serving local food or looking at their menus to see if there's like swaps that might be easy, but really like doing your research and framing the first prospecting and building interest as in like yeah, really getting an idea of what they want and what their goals are. When we're making contact, I think the thing I hear all the time is about people reaching out to people and not getting anything in return. That's definitely really common, and especially when you're doing cold calls to people, it could be like just in the past year of doing this, like sometimes I call someone and I will email them, every couple of weeks for a month and don't hear from them for 2 months. And some people don't even get back to me until like a year later. And now I'm like I'm hearing back from people that are like, thanks for reaching out and thanks for continuing to bother me. Yeah, just didn't have the chance to get back to you. And that consistency is super key. So making contact, and one way to continue that consistency is to track what you're doing. Um, but we talk about like, I think this is sort of like in alludes to your question a little bit, Carrie, of like reaching out to people and letting people come to you versus yeah, helping them plan in their processes. Like a lot of my outreach is cold calls, direct emails to individual people, referencing the conversations that we've had in the past. It's setting up meetings with them to learn about their systems and what their facilities like and what they have. And also dropping in on them and having like, yeah, site visits and trying to go to conventions and conferences that I know they'll be at. And that's very direct and somewhat semi-targeted, but there's also like the passive sales, which is like, yeah, emailing everyone on your list what you have available that week, or having those like Instagram or social media posts, which it is, you get in what you get out of it. If you're, yeah, calling people day in and day out, that eventually pays off in the end. And the best thing I like to like, yeah, well, if you get a hold of someone, which is great, um, you want to be able to have your systems in place where you can respond and offer to something that's relevant to them. You're not just selling them on a product, you're selling them on a process that they can easily wrap their heads around, especially institutional buyers that are extremely busy people and are dealing with a lot of rules. You want to have some of their anticipated questions in mind for when you talk to them. And they'll want to know what is available. And that's not just what you have available, but what things you think schools will actually want to see. And that requires you to do a little bit of your own like market assessment. What form does it come in? How will they have to prepare it or store it? Because that could really depend on whether they can actually purchase the item. What's the price? And does that include delivery? Is it including the, or like, do you have an order minimum? And when can you get it to them? If it's like in a month or just next week, they'll need to know your order schedule and when they can get it. And how do you pay? So kind of what Kayla's talking about with the terms of payment. I like to have all this stuff on my availability list or whatever communication I'm using to reach out to them. So we can easily reference that together and walk them through that as the process. Um, so yeah, you make contact, and the really key thing for consistency is tracking it. Like I said, we use HubSpot, which is, yeah, our CRM tool that there's a lot of different ones like this. And you can, build out a spreadsheet that does the same thing. But really it walks you through those pieces of the funnel. Uh, like, yeah, identifying one, qualifying one as a relevant customer, introduce yourself, and then converting them through the process to eventually close a sale. And it's really not just about like the initial contact, making contact and getting a sale, but continuing that relationship. And that's where it comes into looking at like long-term successes with schools is getting orders way ahead of time. Right now, February, March, they're planning their menus for next year, and we're trying to get ahead of them and know that what is available for the year so they can decide what they use their or like allocate um their dollars for like DoD Fresh and other yeah, like produce incentives and things like that. So it's good to have a sense of knowing like where they are in their process and getting ahead of them and helping solve their problems. And a lot of schools and other institutions want access to local high quality foods. They just might not have a process or a way to do it easily. And then you repeat it and repeat it. So yeah, kind of visualize the going through the deal board and through talking with them. Is that like funnel and process that's time and time again proven no matter what you're selling, but talking about it in local food terms. So yeah, kind of final takeaways before we open it up for questions. It's good for food hubs to assess their own capabilities and goals And I hear a lot of times like food hubs and producers want to pursue institutional sales, but it's good to be like to question the why and the do I have what I need to do that? Because it's not the easiest market. It's not just this um, big sale that could help purchase a lot of like a big volume sale. Um, you're dealing with slower cash flow, lower margins, and it could put hubs and producers into greater financial risk. Um, and institutions shop really differently. So there's one thing of knowing your own systems and capabilities, but being able to align with institutional customers, and treating sales as a continued effortful process is really important. Any questions?
I think I would add one little bit thing that I know we've said this throughout the presentation, but like we're not trying to scare people away from these sales, but we just want to emphasize that like if this is going to be your entire business model, you should be prepared for some of the risks that come along with it. And if you're doing these on a smaller scale, it's not as risky. You don't need to be like freaked out. But we're trying to help establish institutional markets and farm to school and get as many of those institutions to purchase as possible. So we're kind of thinking of it at that volume scale and making it a significant part of business.
Who has questions? I have one for Abigail specifically. Abigail, what surprised you as you started trying to break into institutional sales outside of the region that you were really familiar with? I think that might be a valuable insight for the rest of the folks on this call.
Yeah, I realized that. So I'd been working with like the farm to school program for the past 6 or 7 years, and I realized a lot of the schools that we were learning from and I talked to regularly were the special exceptions. Like you said in your chat here, like they schools and other institutions, their default is to order through their broad line and to go through systems that have either been set up before them or that they are really comfortable with. But the majority of people who we're reaching out to like need a clear process, and those awesome like school district directors that are or nutrition directors that are ordering from a bunch of different farms and figuring it out on their own like tend to be the exception. But it's not that like schools don't want to purchase local foods, it's that they just need a system that's easy for them to do so. Yeah, Delaney.
I was just curious about the frequency of orders from all of these institutions, like with the hubs you're working with. Like, how often are they ordering and how frequent?
Yeah, so like corporate dining and like a lot of the early education sites are like week to week. Schools, I've been like noticing more of like a monthly cadence. But since we're like supporting several different schools, it's like, yeah, like we still have orders every week, but it's just like from a different group of institutions. Um, but yeah, I'd say like 2 week to like a month order like normally from each like customer that are recurring. And then some of them are like large purchases for like one item in that year because they want to do that feature. So like we just got like Hillsborough a bunch of green pasta for March, and we'd hope to recur that order year to year. It's a pretty big sale for the producer, but it's definitely more of like a feature style versus like a week to week order. Yeah, Carrie.
Thank you both so much for this information today. It's just so valuable. And I wanted to share that we're having our first sit down with all the school districts just in Josephine County, which is largely attributed to all the pre-work done with Abigail in the last 6 years down here. And I'm just wondering, what is the expectation for that first conversation? And is it reasonable to, if the parties are ready to move forward, should I suggest like let's do a pilot with one product or a couple farms for next fall as if they're right now planning for next year's menu? I just wondering what is going to be a well-received suggestion for the next step.
Yeah, it's great that you have like this opportunity to reach them ahead of time. Um, I think you can suggest, yeah, monthly feature or like a recurring order, something that they use regularly. Um, but a lot of it's just like knowing that they have a process for ordering local food through you. So like not necessarily selling them on like the idea of what to feature, but like like, hey, like you can order this at this time and this is our schedule and or like yeah, there's a bunch of different ways, but like however they want to work with you. If they want to buy local food, they'll buy local food from you. It's just like, yeah, suggesting that like they have an easy option for sourcing it, if that
So
makes sense.
should we provide like a calendar of seasonal items or assume that they already have that? Should we, present our online marketplace as a tool for them to order, or should we propose like sitting down to having a deeper discussion about next year's menu or minimally processed needs, that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely come with an item of available items, a list of available items, I meant to say. And sorry, I didn't like, yeah, definitely have a list and prices of things that you know you will have. That is the thing that they'll need to make any decision off of. So compile that first, have a system for them ordering whatever it is that they see on the list, and then talk about frequency and how they want to feature that item, like after they feel like sold into the process and the items that you have listed. But other people might have other suggestions too. So I'll open up the room.
I was going to say one piece of that too, like you might think about if you have a software portal that people can order in, just think about the timing, the time frame that is open and closed. Because if you are telling them like, well, yeah, you can order from here, but you can't order until the Monday before the Wednesday delivery, so you're not even going to tell us that you want those potatoes or those squash until 2 days before, then you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You want to try to get that information collected as soon as possible and get them to confirm it as soon as they will. So you might just, be doing a little bit of that more manually than your website, depending on how your ordering system actually works online.
Other questions in this group? Is everybody like completely ready to sell to their institutions now? Has anybody been scared away from selling to institutions? Sandra has.
Sandra, the big guy.
Yeah, Sandra, do you want to talk about that more? What are your reflections or reactions?
Oh, it's just me, so there's no way I could do that by myself right now.
Yeah, really fair. Capacity assessment complete.
And I think this is where too, like, we see farmers that are maybe doing some supplemental things on a school salad bar, where it's like you're not trying to plan months ahead to get $5,000 worth of sales at a delivery, but more like I've got extra things that you could feature on the salad bar, and I could treat you more like a small wholesale customer or even a D2C customer for these small volumes. Like, I don't think folks have to rule that out, but there's the kind of level of challenge and difficulty and like amount of significance you want to give these sales that I think is really worth thinking about, planning around, and having intentionality around.
Yeah, I think Bobby definitely not ready down at Umpqua Valley Farm School, except for that you are. You're thinking about it, and just because you're not ready this season doesn't mean you can't be planning for next season, knowing what you know that, oh, we need to have cash backstopped so that we can handle this kind of sale. Or you might want to approach it, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. Farm to school or farm to institution is not one thing. You can think about what is one crop that makes sense for me to engage with this kind of buyer around that is special, that is interesting, that is important to my community because we produce a lot of it, we produce it really well. And that's what you're going to approach your institution around. And maybe it's not your whole business plan, but maybe it's literally like it's 5 transactions every year that you're doing, and that's meaningful in your hub. There's no rule that says farm to institution is that's what you're doing. I'm doing farm to institution, and now that's what my hub is. Your hub is what you tell your hub it is.
Yeah.
And you have to think about what's important to you and how it's important to you.
Bingo. Yeah.
Another thing I learned too is like let some of the like prepared items that we have made in the state like bolster what you can offer to schools and other institutions. Like all the hubs that we work with carry like the yakisoba noodles that are school formulated and the tamales from Salsas Locas that are formulated. And we're selling those items and then also produce items to a site to be able to meet order minimums and to like actually get in front of a school year round. So through our hub network, we have those products available for other areas too. If you want to contact me to purchase from the food hub to help bolster what you are offering is definitely an option. And a lot of the hubs across the state have been doing that, like selling to each other at a lower markup and things like that. So there are ways to get more products that you have and to build out that list if that's ever a limitation to approach a school.
Abigail, have you seen I know you're mostly working with the 3 hubs, but you do have some contact with the other hubs through the OFIC work, I think. So if I'm incorrect in that, please correct me. Have you seen any of the smaller hubs either tackle, a farm to institution sale successfully, or that you can call out as an example, and or that are utilizing this idea of bringing in some other products specifically to tackle this kind of sale? Is that a success story that you've seen yet, or is that an untested idea so far?
Definitely untested, but like we were talking with like the Mid-Valley Food Hub group that like are only doing produce, and so they're looking to explore like adding like the tuna and some other like yakisoba noodles on like from Lane County Bounty to be able to do that. So definitely untested, but it's tested within like our 3 hubs being able to like add those products on and making that better. So it's like yeah. It's like if you are going to be pursuing institutional sales, it's good to have a wide variety of items and be able to offer it year round. So those things might help.
Do you guys have any thoughts about, I think most of the folks that are on this call are representatives of smaller hubs. Do you have any thoughts or advice for them to, if they want to continue pursuing farm to institution, how they might start positioning themselves? And they're probably mostly smaller hubs with a smaller institution that they're working closely with, as you know really well, Abigail. Do you have any thoughts kind of blending your 2 experience viewpoints for those hubs now? It's okay if you don't. I might be putting you on the spot pretty hard there.
No, I think I was thinking about this even before the call of like, okay, well, when you're not at this point, like, what do you do? And I think like having that like one-on-one relationship with a school or like pursuing that, like if you are in a smaller community, kind of isolated, like I know with Klamath Grown, like you guys have a really good relationship with Klamath County School District, and like that might be, oh no.
You're still here. You're still here.
Okay, I was like, everyone else froze. So.
That's by the sound of your voice, I was like, that's Abigail's like, I dropped the call voice, but you're still here.
But yeah, like those relationships can still work and like be a part of your systems, but yeah, I don't know. I think that's something as a state and as the Food Hub Network, we should explore those questions of like getting people ready. But maybe Kayla has some other thoughts.
I mean, I guess there's a couple things I was reflecting on even as we were like talking this through, because I do feel like a little bit like we gave you guys the like jump scare version of the like selling to institutions. And I think, there are like ECs out there, there are smaller schools out there, there are folks that are going to have like less volume requirements. And I like what Sydney said about like thinking about one product that you could do with that institution, or like maybe it's one or two products and like two or three institutions, and thinking of it as like a small portion of your sales versus the whole crux of your business. I think what we've seen in other states too, and other like food hub networks, is sort of like food hubs interacting in ways that are almost like nodes and central hubs. So, uh, like for example, in Iowa and in Hawaii, there are some of the hubs that are like more direct to consumer focused, but they might not always have the supply to either have the quantity of a product they want or the diversity of a product they want. And they rely on some of the hubs that are more wholesale to like help them fill out their direct to consumer offerings. And in those cases too, that can be really helpful to say like, I want to serve a school in my area, but like can't do it with my normal supply, or maybe can't do it with like my financial model. It might be then that like, could you become a cross-docking site for a hub that can do that? And you're doing last mile deliveries for them and they're paying you for that, which is helping your budget, but you're not having to have the entire framework of a system that would serve a school and the entire wholesale list figured out yourself and the entire cash flow problem solved. You're sort of like collaborating and cooperating with each other's strengths to do that and still being able to like serve your direct to consumer market. So I think when you work like a network and when you're collaborating and when you think about the goals of like what's best for the farmers and what's best for the institutions, there's so many different ways to make this work, I would say.
Other questions in this group? Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
Oh no, I'm just figuring things out. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Do we have other questions in this group? Then I think we'll call it. I want to say a huge thank you to Abigail and Kayla. This was we have a question from Jude about your roles as kitchen sink.
Yeah, good question. Jude, if I think I understand your question, sort of like what we're doing as Kitchen Sink. Abigail is really like doing the sales for the hubs and representing their products to the institutional customers. And my role is more to sort of support Abigail and the hub she's working with in terms of strategy. But when we work in the kind of consulting role, usually we're working on like developing food systems product projects or research or things that would help people inform like how to develop their food system, whether that's a group of nonprofits or a public agency or someone that's looking to like figure out building the food system in their region. We're not like in terms of like I'm not helping people build out their business models. I'm not sure if that's part of what your question is asking, but we are connected to other folks that do that and often kind of recommend that folks would do that kind of deep pro forma business planning thought process.
All right. Any last questions?
I realized, Abigail, that we didn't share with people the number of sales that you've done this year. So if that's something that didn't get shared at the OCFSN retreat or something that you want to share at some point, we can always send out kind of like with all this thought and all this work that's happened, what has that materialized in purchases? Or
Yeah.
talk about that in a later conversation.
I can share like now, like since we started, we're at like 184,000, which is about like 15% if you like of all these hubs revenues. So like it's a lot of work and the return is what they want out of it, but that's still only like 15% of their revenue. So, which is like a good goal for their size, and we're continuing to use institutional sales to help stabilize and grow these hubs to get them into a more stable model. But yeah, so far so good.
Hasn't even been a full year of sales yet. So
Yeah, almost a full year. Yeah, in March or April.
Pretty exciting to
Yay.
see the movement. And not incidentally, it is related to the trade network activity that we talked about, I think it was about 2 weeks ago. So this has been a big month of Food Hub meetings. And it's really exciting to see all of this effort come to fruition. I hope other people are as excited as I am, because I feel like, wow, we're pretty cool in Oregon.
Yeah, thanks for having us on here, Sydney. And yeah, if people have questions, feel free to reach out. I'll put my email in the chat.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you both so much for your time. This is a great presentation. The content was really, really, really helpful. I hope you know how much we appreciate that you took the time to put together such a great presentation.
Yeah, that's why we have Kayla here.
All
Thanks,
right, you
everyone.
guys. See you next time.
Take care.